If I could only take one filter with me on a photography expedition, without a doubt it would be the polarizing filter. Apart from dramatically improving some photos, the polarizing effect's not something you can reproduce in post-production. In today's video, I want to show you, by way of example, the three main reasons I use a polarizer in landscape photography. They are: number one, to darken skies or make clouds stand out. Number two, to make the colors of foliage more intense by reducing glare. And number three, to reduce reflections in water or damp surfaces. And some other points I'll cover in this video are: number one, things to be aware of when using a polarizing filter. Number two, what to look for when buying one. And number three, how to avoid common polarizing filter problems and ways to fix these in post-production. So what does a polarizing filter do? It's basically an optical device used to block certain light waves from reaching the lens. In effect, what a polarizing filter does is reduce glare and reflection and darken skies. You don't even have to put the filter on your lens to test its effect. I often just hold the polarizing filter up to my eye to decide if I'm going to use it or not. And of the two types of polarizer, circular and linear, I'll only be covering circular in this video, as this is the most common type of polarizer in use in photography today. So let's get into the three main uses of the polarizer. Number one, to darken skies or make clouds stand out. The critical thing to know when darkening skies or making clouds stand out is that the polarizing effect is only apparent when you're pointing the camera at a 90-degree angle to the sun. So that is that the sun is at your side, not behind you or in front of you. When using a wide-angle lens as well, one of the things to be aware of is that as the lens picks up much wider view of the sky, you will see the intensity of the polarizing tapering off at the edges. Later in this video, I'm going to show you some strategies and post-production techniques to get around this issue. You alter the intensity of the polarizing effect by rotating the filter. This is important because it's not always necessary or desirable to have the filter at its full intensity. The photographer needs to decide how much intensity to use. So my second most common use of a polarizing filter is to make foliage more intense by reducing glare. So whenever you see bright spots or reflections on foliage and you want to reduce or eliminate them and enhance the colors, you want to think about using a polarizing filter. More often than not, I use a polarizing filter when working in forests, as it really brings out the colors of the foliage. And again, you alter the intensity of the effect by rotating the filter, and you may well not want it at full intensity. As I mentioned before, just hold it up to your eye to see if it creates the look that you're after before you decide to put it on your lens. And the third most common reason I use a polarizing filter is to reduce reflections in water or damp surfaces. The two reasons I want to reduce glare on water is to see what's beneath or to see the color of the water. However, you can go too far, as I have in this image here. I should have dialed back the polarization to include a reflection, and that would have made it clear that the kayak was sitting on the water, not floating above, as it looks like a bit in this image. In this second example, you can see that with polarization, the water takes on more color and goes darker. This is a classic use of the polarizing filter. If you're taking a photo at a river and there's water running over rocks, or the rocks are damp, you can use a polarizer to bring out the color and texture of the rock. So they are the three main reasons I would use a polarizing filter for landscape photography. Now for some other considerations. Number one, things to be aware of when using a polarizing filter. The most common type of filter is the screw-on type. The downside of this type of attachment is that they can be fiddly to put on, especially when your fingers are cold or wet. When you're rotating the filter to find the best position, it's quite easy to accidentally screw it off and drop it. Also, if you're using a wide-angle lens, you need to be aware of the part polarization of the sky. To correct this issue, either dial back the intensity of the polarizing effect or use one of the post-production techniques I describe in the next part of this video. I wouldn't leave the polarizing filter on the lens all the time because you lose up to 2 stops of light, and sometimes polarization can give unwanted effects. So I make a habit of only putting it on when I need to use it and then taking it off again. So that's off by default. And if you're using a polarizer on a drone, just be aware that you need to adjust the polarization required before you put the drone up. Number 2, what to look for when buying a polarizing filter. If I were buying a filter now, I would look at the clip-on options that are available. These are either magnetic or some sort of clip, rather than the traditional screw-on method of attachment. The other system of polarizing filter that you could look at getting is a kit. So one of the popular kits, such as those put out by Nissi or Lee, have the advantage of being a comprehensive filter system where you can combine polarizing filters with other filters. You can also use the one filter for all of your lenses and simply have an adapter ring to fit it to each of your lenses. The downside of these kits is that they are very bulky and can be quite slow and cumbersome to use. Number 3, how to avoid common polarizing filter problems and ways to fix these in post-production. So as mentioned, if you're using a wide-angle lens and are getting darkening of one area of the sky, the easiest way to fix this is to dial back the intensity. However, sometimes you want the polarization effect, and you can partially fix this in Lightroom or Photoshop. I'll show you how I fix this in Lightroom. So in Lightroom, the technique is to apply a radial mask over the darkened area. It can take quite a bit of going backwards and forwards, adjusting the softness of the mask and various tonal sliders to minimize the darkening. And in Photoshop, you can combine a polarized version with an unpolarized version. And this is a technique I use quite a lot. So obviously you do need to have planned this when you're taking the shots and make sure you get the polarized version and the completely non-polarized versions, and that preferably your camera's on a tripod so the images are in perfect registration. So there's my take on the polarizing filter. If I were putting together an absolute minimum of equipment, it would be a camera, a lens, and a polarizing filter. It's really that useful. I always have it with me if I'm photographing the landscape, and as you use it more often, it will become second nature and you'll get better at judging whether you need to use it or not. It's a lightweight piece of equipment, so there's very little to overhead to carrying it with you, so why not always have it? Sometimes the polarizing filter can transform an image from being just okay to being spectacular. Thanks for watching. See you next time.